Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Orca Month, catching up with conservation canines. We're just getting the live up and running now, so we will get all the sharing and monitoring and all of that stuff happening, and I'll make sure we're on the right channels. Looks like we're going, so cool. We've got some people joining us, so we'll start with introductions and just buy ourselves some more time. Hello, everyone. I'm Colleen Weiler. I'm the Jessica Ricos Fellow for Orchid Conservation with Whale and Dolphin Conservation. And if you have been tuning in for our Orca Month events so far, you have seen my face and heard my name before. So thanks for coming back and joining us. And I am so happy to be joined tonight by our favorite orca researcher, and maybe a special appearance by our favorite orca researching dog, Giles and Eba. And Giles is joining us for the second time this month already for Orca Month. She's an Orca Month superstar. She joined for our event with Patagonia and Defenders of Wildlife last week. That was just a week ago. And she has been all over Orca Month. She's did a great presentation on conservation canines at the kickoff event last Sunday, and that has been recorded, and we'll share the link for that because that was a really good conversation and cool videos of Giles and Eba doing their thing. So tonight it's going to be really casual. I'm just going to chat with Giles about her research and hear what they've been up to, and then take questions from all of you. So put questions in the Facebook comment and I will monitor those and share them with Giles. And I'm going to introduce her now. So this is Dr. Deborah Giles, who goes by her last name, Giles. She is a killer whale researcher and has been part of Dr. Samuel Wasser's Conservation Canines program with the University of Washington Center for Conservation Biology. So many words. Since 2009. She started as the vessel captain and now works with her own dog, Eba, who also happens to be a Disney princess, to locate killer whale scat, which helps to monitor the physiological health of the southern resident orcas. Giles received her PhD from the University of California, Davis in 2014, focusing on the southern residents. She has been a longtime southern resident researcher. And in addition to her work with conservation canines, she is a resident scientist and lecturer at the University of Washington Friday Harper Labs. She's the science and research director with the nonprofit organization Wild Orca. And she is also the science advisor with the Orca Salmon Alliance, which both WDC and Wild Orca are a member of. So she is a busy, busy lady. And we are, as always, grateful for her taking the time to come and chat with us and share some information about the orcas and conservation canines for Orca Month. So, hi, Giles.
Hey, Colleen. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. How are you? How has your Orca Month been so far?
It's been fantastic. I have to say that this year's kickoff event was my favorite so far, even though I love being in person with everybody, and that would have been really fantastic. Just the kind of the breadth of what was covered and the seamlessness of everything. And Alan Budwell and Cindy were awesome as the MCs for the whole thing. I just thoroughly enjoyed the whole thing and learned a tremendous amount about killer whales in other parts of the world, which was really fun and fascinating. And I just thought that was a really neat addition to what we're doing here.
Yeah, it was really cool to see kind of the comparison between southern resident orcas and other populations around the world, and both how they're similar and how they're different, and hear a little bit about the research that's happening on other orca populations, and then get updates from all the people doing such great work for the southern residents.
Yeah, it really made me think. I've been teaching for a while. I used to teach at UC Davis before I graduated, and then even after I graduated, I taught a class. And I remember very vividly a student in one of those classes raising his hand and saying, how can you study a population of animals? And this was a while ago when we had a lot more southern residents. I think we had probably 80 at the time. or maybe even more. And he said, how can you stand to study a population of animals that seems destined for extinction? And I said, oh my gosh, like, number one, they are not destined for extinction. They're incredibly resilient. And they have we're giving them a fighting chance by the research that we're doing and the advocacy and outreach and education that's happening. But furthermore, the southern residents being the most studied population of killer whales on the planet, and arguably the most studied whale population on the planet, everything that we're learning about here, every new research avenue, every new question, research design techniques, the different metrics that we take, all of that can be applied to killer whales in other parts of the world that are not as imperiled as the southern residents. And so that makes the work just in itself worthwhile and valuable. But just going back, I have not, and I know you haven't yourself, Colleen, and nobody that we work with regularly has written this population of animals off. And so we keep doing what we're doing and continuing to learn more and more all the time.
Yeah, I think to work with them is to have hope and optimism for them, because just getting to know the orcas, you learn how resilient they are and how much of a fighting chance that they really do have. And so the more you work with them, the more you just feel like, of course there's hope, and of course we can turn things around. We just have to keep going at it.
Right. Yeah. Sparking the political will to do what we already need, what we already know needs to be done. That's the key right now, is continuing the long-term data sets for sure, so that we can monitor change over time. But now taking that science and putting it in the hands of the public so that they can contact policymakers, which is what you do, what I do. That's so important.
Very important. And we will get to that, because I'm sure folks are wondering, well, how do we contact our policymakers at the end? But I do want to go back a little bit to some of the research that you mentioned, and how what you're doing can help to inform and support research that is happening in other parts of the world. Because you and Eba and the Conservation Canines team do some pretty amazing, groundbreaking research with orca scat. So can you talk a little bit more about what exactly you do on the boat and what orca scat can tell us about the whales?
So the idea using a scat detection dog with this project in particular, but any endangered species, is that it's non-invasive. We don't have to get anywhere near the animals to collect their scat, whether that be in the terrestrial realm or in the marine realm. Once our dogs have the scat imprinted in their brain, where they know that smell, when they find that smell, that means that they get to play. They work really hard. They continue to work really hard to find that scat. So what we do, in a perfect world, we get notice early in the morning that the southern residents are in mass on the west side of San Juan. And we head out there in the boat, and Eba is ready to go. She starts whining as soon as we kind of turn down the pathway to go to Snug Harbor, where our boat is located. So she knows what she's doing when she gets in the car and we make that turn, that she's going to get to go to work. And we put her in her life jacket and we walk her down to the boat. And then we utilize the Pacific Whale Watch Association web app that they've given us access to, which we are so grateful for. Also, individuals along the west side of San Juan Island that notify me that whales are there. And we take that intel and we head towards the whales. And then the idea is that with the dog, we can operate really far away from the animals. So we usually just let the animals go 300, 400, 500 meters past us. And then we orient the boat downwind. And we have Eba out on the front of the boat, and her nose is just automatically trained to seek out that smell. And then as soon as now this is an interesting picture I just want to comment on. we were on a scent. So this looks like we're really close. We were, I'm going to say about 75 meters away from this group of animals. This is not the group of animals that we were on a scent for. The ones that we were on a scent for had already passed by, and these guys surprised us and popped up right off of our bow. And we stopped the boat, and we let them go. And then we ended up turning in this direction to the starboard, to the right. And Eba was able to find the scat sample from the previous group of whales that had already passed. This is a fantastic picture, but this does not tell the story of what Eba does and why it's non-invasive. Generally, we try and stay 300 or 400 meters away from the whale. So I love this picture, but I just wanted to put that out there that generally people used to ask me when I was first studying this population in 2009, like, oh, what's the whale that you're with? I'm like, I have no idea, because we never see them close enough to get aside the saddle patch. You've been on the boat with us before, you know what it's like. And I just, well, what I'm an expert on is the trailing edge of a dorsal fin sort of thing. But anyhow, so that this is showing a picture of me giving an indication to the driver to go just a little bit to the right. And you can see actually Eba's head, her nose, if you can extend out where her ears are, you can imagine where her nose is. That's what I'm following. Literally, I am following whichever way her nose points. And then also things like she'll start wagging her tail. That's usually her first tell, like, oh, I know that. And then she'll start licking her lips. She does this thing that I call sniffing up the air, and she goes like that. She just is like really trying to pull the scent in from different levels. And I think that helps her hone in on where that sample is. And then when we're really on it, she's whining and shaking and pulling really hard on her leash. And there's, really, she's a tiny dog. She's only 30 pounds, but she's a mighty dog. She's strong. And when she's on a scent, it's hard to pull her off of it, which we don't want to do anyway. So she'll take us, up to a nautical mile away from where she first hit the sample to where we collect the sample. It can be that far away, and she will stay on it, continuing to move as the sample is moving. She'll adjust and move. And that's kind of the interesting dance that the dog and the handler and the driver end up developing those tools to make that work.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I've been lucky enough to join you on the boat a couple of times, and just watching the interaction between the team members, the dog, the handler, and the driver. You guys, you're picking up on those very subtle cues that the dog is giving you. And the whales are usually like far, far, far away because we're looking for what they left behind. And you're just directing each other of where to go to hone in on that scent. And it's just amazing to watch. And you're picking up on stuff that just the tiniest little movement of the dog and then signaling to the driver. So it's a fantastic team. And it's amazing to watch you all work. But what you're after is something most people would probably think is pretty gross, but you're picking up whale poop. And why are you picking up whale poop? Why collect that?
So one scat sample, see, that's a really interesting one too. Like I remember collecting that one even. A lot of people might drive right past that thinking that it's decomposing, ulva, like sea lettuce. But the smell is very distinct. Sometimes they don't have smell. The dogs can smell it, but it's faint enough that we can't smell it. But when
you can usually smell it though.
Yeah, usually we can smell it, and it smells like just essentially slightly old fish, which basically it is. These scat samples can be anything from like this beautiful green, actually I really love that color, to brown, red, yellow. We can have lots of different colors of the scat and lots of different consistencies of the scat, and all of those things. Yeah, that's a really interesting one too. That's very diffuse. As soon as we collected it and brought it on board, it broke up. Sometimes they stay together. Sometimes they're really thick, like very thick pancake batter. We describe it as pancake batter. That's what a perfect sample is like. It's like somebody took a humongous ladle of pancake batter and threw it across the water, so that you end up getting this splatter basically of like, small dinner plate size to, tea plate size, all the way down to just the tiniest, like the smallest bit. Yeah, that's a really interesting sample. If you can blow that up just a smidge. I love that sample. That is so fatty and rich, thick. It's like there's little bits hanging down from that. But what you will see on that is if you look off to the right, there's a little teeny fleck. I don't know if you can put your cursor on that right there. Sometimes that's all we collect.
Folks can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tiny. We need about 0.5 mils or a mil to do any of the hormone work that we want to do. But the bigger the sample, the better, because number one, it gives us an opportunity to analyze it for other things like toxicants. PCBs, which was an industrial lubricant that was banned in the early 70s. Still, it's considered a legacy chemical, so it's really prevalent in the environment still. Also DDT, which is an agricultural chemical that was banned for use in the US, although very sadly, we still manufacture it here and ship it to Mexico and other countries. So those folks are being poisoned and their land is being poisoned. It really should be banned worldwide. It's banned in UK. In the EU, it was never really picked up. And then also an emerging toxicant called PBDEs, or flame retardants. These are becoming more and more prevalent in the environment along the West Coast, as most of us have, or a lot, I have no idea who's watching, but a lot of folks, California, Oregon, and Washington was literally on fire last year. And one of the tools that firefighters use to put that out are these flame retardants. And it turns out that they're fat-loving. They're called lipophilic toxicants that are estrogen mimickers, as well as a number of other things where they really wreak havoc on the mammals any biological system that takes it in. And we're finding all of those chemicals in these scat samples. So the bigger the scat sample, the better. We can look at hormones like stress hormones, and we can look at stress hormones and tie it to vessel number, because we're nowhere near the whales. So we can kind of exclude our boat from being one of the ones that are stressful, possibly stressful. So stress hormones, nutrition hormones, pregnancy hormones. I mentioned the toxicants. We can also look for things like parasites and bacteria, fungus. Dr. Wasser's newest grad student, Will Sano, is looking at the gut microbiome. And we're learning so much more about the gut biome now. Really people are saying, especially with human studies, that the gut is the second brain. So what's happening in your gut really does play a pretty big role in the health of the organism. And so Will Sano is going to be looking at that. And that's just a few things that I've named. I mean, really, that I have said that one scat sample is like a gold mine, and it really is. We can mine it for so much information. And by using the scat detection dogs, the conservation canines dogs, we're able to do it non-invasively.
Speaking of dogs and gut being the second brain, trying to figure out some intestinal issues for my own dog right now, but that's another conversation. But you mentioned pregnancy hormones, and so you can tell which whales are pregnant or have been pregnant recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so any animal that's pregnant puts out different sex hormones at different stages of pregnancy. So when a female is in estrus, meaning receptive to pregnancy, that those first moments of pregnancy, or those first days, weeks, or so, the female is putting out a certain suite, if you will, of pregnancy hormones. And as the pregnancy continues throughout the gestation period, which for killer whales is 17 to 18 months, different sex hormones are become more important, and other ones are slack off. So using this information, we can tell that a female is say ovulating or receptive to pregnancy, if she's pregnant, and if she's pregnant, how pregnant. And then we can also tell, those females that gave us those pregnancy hormones through their feces, that they were, say, late-term pregnancy, and then we see them again, physically see them again shortly after that, and they don't have a calf. That tells us that that calf was either died in utero and she was able to successfully expel that fetus, or in certain very sad cases, like our very much loved J32 Rhapsody, who died because she was not able to expel her female. We don't know what happened, but the calf died in utero, and then that killed the mom. But basically, that's the thing. I mean, that these babies are born. Maybe they're not seen by a researcher. They might be born alive, but they die right away. And so we can tell. That's the upshot of it is that 69% of the females that we got fecal samples from during our study up through 2018 showed that 69% of those females that were getting pregnant were either early terminating them, spontaneous miscarriage, or the calf was born possibly alive, but died before they were able to be documented by a human, which is not considered, those are considered unsuccessful pregnancies, even if a calf is born full term and even breathes and nurses and things like that. If it doesn't reach a time when it's basically seen by the researchers, it can't be documented in the census, and certainly it's not a participating or it's called the viability of a calf. A viable calf is one that lives long enough to procreate itself, so they're not considered viable pregnancies.
So we had a related question come up in the Facebook, and that is, how do you know which whale the scat came from? So how can you tell, which whale was pregnant, and then you don't see them later with a calf, so you can confirm that that was an unsuccessful pregnancy?
Yeah, great question. There are a couple of ways that we do that. Number one, when the whales are quite pregnant, actually, even when they're not super pregnant, but clearly pregnant to those of us that watch them enough, you can see the change in their body morphology just from looking at them from the side. So we can tell sometimes that an animal is pregnant and then we've got our colleagues at SR3 that are doing and others on that project that are doing the drone work, and the drone work can tell us really interesting information about the girth of the animals. Yeah, so that's a great picture. So doctors Holly Fernbach and John Durbin and their colleagues are at South Hall Environmental and SR3 are they're experts in the measurements of these animals. So as a female gets pregnant, like with any animal that's pregnant, it gets bigger. And so they've started to be able to hone in on the term, what term the pregnancy is in. As far as the fecal samples are concerned, we collect the sample. We tend to target, in a perfect world, we are behind a group. I call it sampling a lot of butts. But yeah, basically, like, we want to see, we first off, we look for groups with females that are of the right age to get pregnant or that might be pregnant. And then in an ideal world, it's a big group of animals. And in a perfect world, it's several females in that group. And so we will sample behind that group. And then we collect the sample. And when it's analyzed, the DNA from that sample is compared to a database that has been curated, I guess is a good word for it, from our colleagues at NOAA. The Northwest Fisheries Science Center have been cataloging the DNA of each and every single individual animal. Certainly all of them that have been born since the study started. I think we have DNA samples for all living members of the southern resident clan, and then other animals that have died since. So we can match that scat sample to the DNA that's on record.
So you can pair the poop with the individual whale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's very, very rarely we will end up behind just one whale. And if it's a whale that's known to be pregnant, we will preferentially target her. Again, not close, but we'll go behind her. And so the likelihood that if we find a sample and there's only one whale present, it's quite likely that it was that female. And we can kind of put down a, possible, J35 or possible J31 or something like that. But we always match that to the catalog.
So another related question that came up in the Facebook, and also kind of combining that research collective, you're collecting the fecal samples, getting the drone images. NOAA has done some work to kind of lay the groundwork of all of this. Is what are the biggest causes of the low birth rates? Chemicals in the water or something else?
By far, it's the lack of quality and quantity prey. Those females, those 69%, and probably then some of the females that are losing their pregnancies before those babies are born, born and live past those first moments. Those females that are losing their calves are nutritionally deprived. They're not getting enough to eat. It's a natural response for the body to expel a pregnancy if the female is not getting enough to eat. It's just a biological self-preservation situation. And it's unfortunate, but at least it leaves, most often it leaves the mother there in the environment to conceive again, ideally.
Ideally, with some very sad exceptions, as you mentioned, for Rhapsody a couple of years ago. So yeah, a similar thing happened when I worked with sea lions a few years ago, when they were suffering an immense food shortage. There was a really high rate of pregnancy loss in that population as well. So it happens across species in wild animals. So yeah, it really comes back to salmon and making sure that they have food.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention in humans too, in times of war, there's high miscarriage rate. I mean, it just makes sense. Stress, nutrition, lack of nutrition, those start to coalesce and become a negative feedback. You add in other things like when the whales are not getting enough to eat, they're metabolizing their fat stores, which releases these fat-loving toxicants, which make the animals feel ill, not as able to forage as successfully. It's just, it really truly is a terrible negative feedback loop that cascading effects of not having enough fish in the water. So by far, the other things are incredibly important, and we need to be addressing them. But if the whales had enough to eat, these other things would not be impacting them in the same way that they are with the southern residents. And we know that really clearly from the mammal-eating killer whales, so-called transients, not so transient anymore, also being called Biggs killer whales, as a tip of the hat to Mike Bigg, who was the godfather of photo identification back in the early 70s. So these Biggs killer whales, mammal-eating killer whales, are increasing at a really regular, steady rate. And we used to say that the normal birth interval for a killer whale was every 3 to 5 years. There are females in the transient population that are having calves that are being born alive, healthy and alive and living less than 3 years apart. So that wow. Just shows you that these females can, yeah, and it's not just one, it's about 12 that we've cataloged so far.
Just having back-to-back babies.
Yeah. I mean, we know that the southern residents get pregnant. They get pregnant easily. They're very tactile individuals, should I say, and infertile. So being able to conceive is not the problem. Being able to carry the pregnancy to term is the problem, to full term.
And going back to a little bit of a previous thing we mentioned, we do still have hope for them because we do know that a lot of this stems from very known issues. We know that they're not getting enough food, and we know some things that can be done to help get them more food. Habitat restoration and protection for salmon, restoring interconnected watersheds and rivers. And something that both of our groups have been working on the last couple of years is getting the orcas a allocation or integrated into fishery management so that they get a piece of the salmon pie, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you can learn a lot through.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're going to go there.
Am I going back to poop?
No, I was just going to, I think you were going to go there about what people can do as far as commenting right now. There's an open comment period happening.
I was going to say that to the end, but we can bring it up now and just throw an action in the middle. And yeah, no, there's, I will find a link and put it in the chat. And yeah, there's an open comment period right now. National Marine Fisheries Service is taking public input on their plan for amending the salmon fishery management plan and setting a threshold at which if the expected return of salmon in the range of the whales for a year is expected to be a certain number, then management provisions will kick in, which could include closing some areas or reducing the amount of fishing to give the whales a chance to find food. Giles, do you want to share maybe what people should say in their public comment?
There's a lot to be said about this issue, and while myself, Colleen, a number of other groups have been really putting ourselves into this dialogue with the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, asking for the whales to have a place at the table. It's shocking that they don't have a place at the table, given that these whales were what I term the original foragers or the original harvesters of Pacific salmon. They've been here for a lot longer than humans have been fishing on these runs, and yet they're not directly factored in as a stakeholder that gets a portion of the salmon that's coming back. What the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, along with NOAA representatives coming into 2021, came up with this threshold, which is, it's too high. I'm sorry, they need to be setting that bar a lot lower, so that, yeah, the threshold that they've set is too high. It's not going to trigger soon enough. And I think it's 966,000 fish predicted to come back. That's a tiny number of fish, but that bar needs to be set lower in order for the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and NOAA to be able to trigger a fisheries closure to protect the fish for the whales and for other wildlife that rely on it for their main sustenance. With regard to what to say, NOAA puts out these notices saying that they want public comment, but they're pretty clear that they want the comments being based on science. And so the best advice that I can give, the easiest advice that I can give tonight, because this could be a whole nother hour, is to go to Wild Orca's website. We have a really clear description of the situation, a distillation of the meetings that occurred over the course of about 18 months, and what you can do, which entails everything from writing letters to calling in and just basically letting your feelings be known. And that it's critical that people get involved in that. And Colleen, you're going to be doing a letter writing event. Is that correct? Teaching people how to do public comments?
That was actually yesterday, but it was recorded. Yeah, and we talked about Amendment 21 in this issue a little bit. And I also referred people to your website, to wildorca.org, for some really specific details. And yeah, your website has a really great breakdown of the issue, and references and resources and all kinds of things to learn about this particular topic. and how to weigh in on it and make your voice heard for Southern residents. So I just put a link in our Facebook chat here too. So everyone definitely go to Wild Orca for all Pacific Fishery Management Council and fishing related topics.
That's awesome. Thank you. And just to finish up, wrap up that discussion, fisheries management is a very, very, very complicated issue that stretches from Southeast Alaska to through California. And then it extends basically westward, because there are people from all over the world, literally all over the world, coming to the Pacific Northwest and Alaska to fish, mostly to Alaska. This is a whole conversation unto itself, but the upshot of it is that as citizens of the planet who care about fish, who care about the whales that rely on them, and the fishermen of all ilk, whether it be the tribal folks that have been fishing salmon since time out of mind, really, there are very, very deep and complicated reasons to think very clearly and thoughtfully about how and when and where we're doing our fisheries. Nobody that I just mentioned wants fish to go extinct, wants wild fish to go extinct, or wants to continue to have play such a significant role in having fish in the water, basically. But the actions that we humans are taking right now are not addressing the issues. The actions that we're taking right now are not going to solve the problem. And so as a community of people on this planet that care about these whales, that care about the fish that they care about, and the humans that care about that fish, we need to be diving deeper into understanding the best way to recover salmon. And again, it's a complicated issue. It would be another talk unto itself. But this too, we know what the problems are. We know the mistakes that we're making along the way. We just haven't gotten the guts yet we haven't found our guts yet to change it.
We haven't learned yet from those past mistakes, which is something that Erica with Breaching Extinction on our event last week with Patagonia, I think she made a really good point of how many more mistakes can we afford to make before it's too late. And hopefully we do get the chance to turn things around. So before we get back to poop, we do have 2 fishing related questions in the chat. Shannon asked if she needs to be a citizen of a specific state to write letters or make a comment on this issue. And nope, it's NOAA is a federal agency. This is a federal rule. So anyone from anywhere, even if you don't live in the US, you can still weigh in on this and you can submit a comment. So please do so. And Javier asked, how much is ghost fishing affecting marine mammals? Do you have any data on this concern, or are there any initiatives to effectively reduce it? And I can talk about this one a little bit because WDC has published, I believe, at least a poster, I'll have to look it up, on ghost fishing. And most entanglements for large whales occur in actively fished gear, and it's usually, an accidental circumstance that just happens because whales and gear overlap. So ghost fishing does not have a huge impact directly on marine mammals. It certainly poses a risk, but it's not as much of a risk as actively fished gear. And I'll find that publication, and I'm sure we have something on our website and add that to the chat. I will say, ghost fishing has more of an impact on fish themselves because they can still get entangled in that gear and it's harder for them to get out of it. I don't know that anyone has looked into how much salmon, which is the primary food source for southern resident orcas, is being impacted by ghost fishing. But similar to entanglements, there are much bigger problems that we know impact salmon and that we know what the solutions for are. Going back to the previous point, we just need the political will to get those things done. And that includes things like habitat restoration, addressing and updating salmon management plans and restoring rivers and reconnecting healthy watersheds. So more
as
salmon.
well as things like, yeah, those are all really, really important things that need to happen. And also things like, removing fish farms from the wild, basically. Like, we should not have fish farms at the river mouths that wild fish are swimming by. Nobody should even be eating this fish. It cannot be a healthy thing for humans to be eating. And this industry in particular, if you want to follow this, Alexandra Morton is just a phenomenal resource for this for the information that's coming out more and more all the time out of BC, Canada. But it can be applied in any area. Fish farms are just a travesty to wild fish and to the ecosystems in which they occur, having detrimental impacts to everything from the seals to the watersheds and everything. So fish farms, big problem. Also, I mentioned it before, but how, when, and where we fish is incredibly important. The fact that we have what's called mixed stock fishing, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mix of stocks, a mix of species, a mix of runs that are occurring where a fisherman is out there trying to find X species, whatever that might be, pollock, hake, something like that. And it ends up being in an area that is also being occupied by different stocks of fish at different ages. Big problem, huge problem with bycatch in Alaska, all through BC, Canada, and Washington state. In some cases, there's more accidentally bycaught salmon, Chinook salmon, than is legally allowed to be fished of the actual species that they're targeting. And those salmon don't get kept, they get thrown back. Mostly dead, dead already, or death, imminent. And so bycatch is a big problem. So when people ask me, how do I know what salmon to eat? Is it okay to eat Chinook salmon? My answer to that is essentially, it's a complicated answer, but in a nutshell, the ideal situation is that where that fish came from. The river of origin. And in an even better scenario, you would know the river of origin and you would know the fishermen, or at least the group of people that are fishing that fish. Because those are people that are invested in the recovery and the sustainability of that salmon. And so I was shocked to find, an example of this. Everybody in Washington here, Western Washington, waits with bated breath and, salivating glands for the first of the sockeye and Chinook from the Copper River in Alaska to hit our ice packs in Pike Street. 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, the first of the season Chinook salmon, Copper River Chinook salmon, hit the ice there, and it was $79.99 a pound. Oof. Yeah, $79.99 a pound for the sockeye, the wild sockeye from the same river, Copper River, $59.99 a pound. It's that expensive because that's what a sustainably harvested salmon actually costs. Right next to that salmon in the ice is wild caught Alaskan Chinook salmon for $13 or $14.99 a pound. That's when you know how shall I say it? You can't know that fish that's that much less expensive is actually sustainably harvested. And so really what it boils down to is be selective in who you're getting your fish from and where that fish is from. Because unless we know what river that fish is bound for, we cannot know. And in fact, 97% of the time, it is from an unsustainably harvested run. That's too high for me. And so it's a challenging situation right now. But the fact of the matter is that we've got below predictable runs coming back of Chinook salmon every year into this region. throughout the salmon's entire range. And so until we can make some hard decisions, hopefully temporary, 10 years, something like that, where we are limiting or stopping fishing, we're going to continue to run up against these same problems. And hatcheries are just a Band-Aid for a bigger problem. Hatcheries are not going to solve the problem here.
Agreed. And it's making, you get stuck in the system where you just have to keep producing fish to put it out there. And, you know, nature is very capable of making more salmon if we give it the space to do so. So
I will say that there are some hatcheries, tribal hatcheries, some other state-run hatcheries that are being done really well and thoughtfully with consideration for the wild Chinook that are coming out, or wild salmon, I should say, that are coming out of that river as well. And those are the ones that we need to be applauding and supporting, and really taking a very close look at the other hatcheries that are, I would say, indiscriminately just putting out too many fish, increasing fish flesh in the water that's not necessarily able to be supported by the ecosystem, and maybe in direct competition with the wild Chinook that are exiting that system at the same time or returning to that system at the same time. So in a nutshell, not all hatcheries are made the same. And so we need to be taking a very, very close look at them as individual operations and seeing how we can benefit them.
Oh, we could spend a whole other hour talking about hatcheries and about salmon management, but welcome to Conservation Canine Conversation, where we always get to hop on tangents about salmon, because salmon is so vital and integral to southern resident orcas and their recovery. But I do want to back up a little bit and get back to orca poop and to Eba, because we did have a question as to where Eba is hanging out right now while we're talking.
She might be at home any minute. She's out with her male companion, human companion, walking on the west side. It's been a bit of we had some training earlier today, which was fun, but we haven't had southern residents for a while. And just about an hour before this event started, I got a text from Cindy Hansen from Orca Network saying, you know, there's a tea party coming in, don't you? And I was like, la, 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 la. So,
well, thanks for giving up the chance to go collect some transient poop to chat with us.
Oh my gosh. This is half of what I do. And so much, oh my goodness. Yeah, right? Did you take that picture?
I don't remember. I think you might have, and you sent it to me, but
no, that's me in the background.
Okay, maybe I did. I do want to ask, since we did just mention transient poop, that you're adding that to your research. You're not just collecting southern resident scat these days. You're going after transient scat too, and even other non-orca species, humpbacks and gray whales. So what are you hoping to learn by branching out and looking at other whales' poops?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, these mammal-eating killer whales in this region are increasing in abundance at a very, very healthy rate. And we know that they're eating animals from these waters, the Salish Sea, and on the outer coast. And so during the kind of spring into late fall, when the southern residents would have been here quasi-regularly in the past, prior to 2013, we would have expected to see them here almost every day during the summer. So these transients are occurring in this water as well. So they're being subjected to the toxicants that their prey is uptaking through the food web and bioaccumulating. And they're also around all of the boats, very wide array of different types of boats and different amounts of sound that those boats put out. And yet they're increasing. And so the three threats that were identified with the southern residents when they were listed was lack of quality and quantity prey. Mammal eaters don't suffer from that. Toxicants in the food web, the transients do suffer from that. In fact, they're more toxic than the fish eaters are because they're eating at a higher level of the food chain. And then lastly, being in noisy waters with a lot of boats. The transients suffer from that as well. And so literally to be able to compare the same, say, for example, a breeding age female from the fish-eating southern residents and a breeding age female from the transients, or, you know, super interesting, what on earth is happening with our young male southern resident fish-eating killer whales? They're dying right when they're getting to that age of reproduction. We don't have the same situation with the mammal eaters. So intuitively, we would think that the problem, the difference, because out of the three, the mammal eaters suffer from two of them. The one that they don't suffer from is the lack of quality and quantity prey. That's what we want to be able to compare directly. Same whales, same area, different ecotypes, eating on different levels of the food chain with different abundance of prey. And that's going to show us for sure. I mean, we already conceptually know this, but those comparisons will be able to definitively say it is the salmon that is the biggest problem for the southern residents. I'm not saying that toxicants are not a problem. I would wager a pretty hefty bet that toxicants are playing a pretty significant role in pregnancy loss. Other things like general pregnancy failure. We know that at least one southern resident that washed up, J18, was sterile. Why on earth do we have a sterile, young breeding age male dying and being sterile? So that's something that we're looking at now. So looking at the male hormones in the male scat samples to see how toxicants are playing a role in possibly, we don't know yet, but possibly playing a role in the viability of the, say, the sperm, for example, in the male killer whales here.
And somebody asked, speaking of Eba, if she is a mentor to any other canine researchers right now.
Not yet, but we are, she's 6, we think. She turned 6 in January. And we are starting to think about having a second dog. We have our team, our conservation canines team, that came up here in the springtime to do some refresher work with us, which was so fun. And really, Eba knocked our socks off. Like, we were kind of babying her. My husband and I were kind of, in hindsight, we didn't know it, but oh my goodness, the Tammy Rock and Julianne Ubagai, who was not able to come this time, but Caitlin Harrington came up and trained with us, and oh my gosh, they made it really hard for us, and I thought hard for Eba, but she was just an amazing rock star and was finding these scat samples hidden in and among rock clusters and down in hollows, and yeah, she's amazing. So but she's 6. That being said, I mean, I really predict that she's got another 6 years at least. Our first conservation canines dog, Tucker, worked until he was about 12 and a half. And he was a big dog. He was a big black lab mix. And he worked easily until he was 12 and a half, something like that. And Eva being a smaller dog, you can see, so her center of gravity is a lot lower. She doesn't have to lean forward on the bow and really pull forward in the way that Tucker did. And so her body is just more, is very, oh my goodness, here's the rock star. Come here. Come here. Come here. Oh my goodness.
There she is. Hi, Eba. Our favorite poop sniffing dog.
She's like, give me my dinner.
And even though she is a Disney princess now, she still has to train and earn her keep, huh?
You know, it's quite honestly, especially after Tammy and Caitlin were able to come here, it's about keeping us trained, we humans trained. It's not about them. She knows what she's supposed to be doing. She knows how to find the scat samples. It's about making sure that we know how to read her.
Yeah, keeping our skills sharp. She's just like, I sniff out the poop, I get a toy. That's how it works.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna grab one more question from the chat, and then we kind of already talked a little bit about how to help and how to get involved, but we can do some more specific ones on that. But one person asked, going back to our Orca Month kickoff, so coming full circle, some of the videos of killer whales in other parts of the world had some populations or groups that had less than 10 individuals. And Southern residents are currently at 75. So for those groups, were they small pieces of the population, or were they hopefully not the future of the Southern residents? I think I can speak on the West Coast community off of Scotland in particular, which is down to just 9 or 10 individuals, and similar to the AT1s up in Alaska, which now have 7. The West Coast community is very heavily impacted by the same toxicants that Giles was mentioning, in much greater quantities than the Southern residents. So they, unfortunately, we don't know what the historical level of that population was, but at this point in time, they've been so impacted by toxics that they haven't had a new calf in a couple decades of observation, and are likely to be seeing the last of that group right now. The AT1s were kind of already a smaller and unique group of mammal-eating orcas, and were unfortunately really heavily impacted by the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And so both of those populations had some pretty catastrophic events happening that impacted them. And certainly a couple of issues that both of our organizations are working on in partnership with others is ensuring that there is not a catastrophic oil spill in Southern resident orca range, because that could be pretty devastating. We don't want any big high risk event to happen when they are still at a pretty precarious number of just 75.
Yeah, I that's exactly right. And I think the one thing that the Southern residents have going for them is that they are, so the two groups that Colleen just talked about are independent groups. They're not grouped with any other whales. Now that's not to say that they didn't at one point outbreed. I don't personally know, but I don't think so. I'm trying to rack my brain. Anyway, point being, both of those groups are essentially functionally extinct. In the one, there's no breeding age females there, and killer whales, we think generally, no matter what kind of ecotype they are, meaning no matter where they're occurring in the world and what their natural history is, we do believe that most, killer whales are matriarchal. Those females are, holding everybody together, and ideally you've got an older female with her breeding age daughters and the grandchildren there as well. Those groups I don't think either one of those groups has a breeding age female anymore. So those groups are functionally extinct. There will be no immigration into that group from a female that is of breeding age. With the Southern resident killer whale clan, so you have one clan that are connected by their acoustics, by their language, and by their genetics kind of over time. But within the one clan, you have 3 pods, J, K, and L pods. And when you kind of amass them together with the 75 individuals that we have now, there still is there is breeding going on between pods, and sadly within pods now too. But I really feel like that's a situation where it's because there's not enough food to eat. The long-term genetics, when you go back and look at the genetics of these whales over time, in the past, they did not have close breeding occurring. They were breeding outside of their pod, but within their clan. And so that's a good thing. That's what we need to be seeing. We need to be seeing situations where no matter where the whales are occurring, that there's enough food to bring members of J's, K's, and L's, or K's and J's, or L's and J's, or however mixed, together at the same time in order for breeding to occur. And You know, fingers crossed that's happening on the outer coast. We don't know for sure, but hopefully that's the case. And yeah, so that's what the Southern residents have going for them, is that there are more of them to be breeding amongst the group compared to the other two groups that Colleen just talked about.
We need more super pods in the Southern residents. Get everybody together in the big party.
Yes, yes.
All right. Well, as always, Giles, you've been a wealth of information and just fascinating topics. And I'm so glad Eba made a guest appearance.
You want to say bye?
I miss her. I haven't seen her in I miss you too, but also I miss Eba.
Oh, yeah.
Where can people learn more about conservation canines and wild orca and support the work and the research that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So Conservation Canines is a program of the Center for Conservation Biology at University of Washington. The Center for Conservation Biology has a website. We're in the midst of updating it. It's very 70s right now, but it works. And then the Conservation Canines, we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. Eba has her own Instagram page called Eba the Whale Dog. I need to get back into posting. I just posted for the first time in months. I'm a terrible Instagrammer. If anybody's out there and interested in being my Instagrammer, I would love to talk to you because I'm very bad at it. But she has her own page and she's on Facebook too. And then Wild Orca, we just have a great group of people working for us, volunteering their time, their expertise, their experience, and do follow Wild Orca both as a website and Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We've got just a tremendous amount of information on our sites for people to learn how to become educated, ways to pass on that information, and ways to get involved by becoming an active advocate. That's what these whales are going to need, is for all of us to pull together and start pushing in the same direction, to be calling for dam breaching, to be calling for habitat restoration, to be calling for fisheries management overhaul, whether that be in when and where we fish, how we fish, different net sizes, and just really asking for the whales to be considered a major stakeholder, because they really have been foraging on and co-evolving with the Pacific salmon for really probably hundreds of thousands of years, but certainly tens of thousands of years. And so we've done a lot of damage really quickly in a blink of an eye. In 100 years or so, we've completely changed the trajectory of this population of animals, including the salmon themselves and everything, 140 species that rely on Pacific salmon. So get involved, get educated, and stay excited, because it's not too late. These whales are incredibly resilient and they're waiting for us to plug in. J35 showed us that they need us, and you know, thank goodness for Colleen. Thank you again, unsung hero in this work to save the Southern residents, and keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for allowing us to participate in this.
It's a pleasure to do so, and I get to work with such amazing and inspirational people who share my optimism and hope for the whales. So to learn more about that fisheries issue we were talking about earlier, definitely visit Wild Orca and get tapped in and follow their action alerts. WDC right now is really focusing on Snake River dam breaching, so you can learn more about that and take action on our page. Check out orcamonth.com for more events. We still have 15 more days of Orca Month and plenty of fantastic events virtually, and some small in-person events if you happen to be in Washington. And go check out Giles's video from the Orca Month kickoff event last week, which has some footage of her and Eba in action and is really cool. And then Orca Month is also sharing weekly action opportunities all month. And last week was the Snake River. I believe the week before was a wild orca action. So go to orcamonth.com for more on all of that. And thank you everyone who tuned in tonight. A couple people did ask if it was recorded, which it was, and we will put it up on our YouTube page shortly, probably in the next couple days. Be patient with us. It is Orca Month. Thanks again. Thanks, Giles. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Eba. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.